Hello viewers, welcome to CEC Gurukul Lectures. I am Dr. Sanawar Soham from Kalindi College, Department of Botany, University of Delhi, and I was discussing ecological factors in ecology and utilization of plant series. In the previous lecture, if you remember, we had discussed the process of soil formation, the composition of soil. We also had enlisted the properties of soil. I described the structure of soil horizon, enumerated different forms of water and their sources. At last, we had discussed the physical properties of water. So now I will be beginning with chemical properties of soil. Now, if we think of chemical properties, the first important thing that comes to our mind is cation exchange capacity of soil. Now, soil, we all know, can hold some amount of cations which are present in an exchangeable form. The total number of charged sites present on soil particles within a given amount of soil is known as its ion exchange capacity. Now, total number of negatively charged sites which are present on clay particles and humus is called its cation exchange capacity, or CEC. Now, it depends upon the number of exchange sites that are present on clay particles and net charge of soil particles, or magnitude of negative charge per unit weight of the soil. Now, this property increases in soil with high clay in organic matter content. Now, if we talk of clay and organic matter particles, they are negatively charged. They are anions. They attract cations or positively charged particles to their surfaces. The bonds between the clay mineral surface and the cations are relatively weak. Hence, cations get exchanged for other cations which are dissolved in the solution. Now, when these absorbed cations get replaced by other cations, the process is called cation exchange. The greater the clay in organic matter content, the greater the CEC, or the cation exchange capacity. Now, it is determined in terms of milliequivalents, ME, per milligrams of soil. If a soil has a CEC value of 1 milliequivalent, this means that it has capability of holding milligram of hydrogen or equivalent for every 100 gram of the soil sample. Now, elements like calcium have 2 charges equivalent to 2 hydrogen ions. This we all know. Now, CEC depends upon the quantity of the exchangeable hydrogen ions and other bases which are present in the soil. Now, cation exchange is an important property of soils for retaining nutrients and increasing their availability to the plants. Cations which are present in the soil, they mainly include nutrients such as potassium, calcium and magnesium. They loosely held nutrients can be taken up by plant roots or by other soil organisms. Now, this property helps the soil to filter environmental contaminants from waste water. Now, moving on to the next ecological factor, the property of soil, which is soil pH. The acidic or basic nature of the soil, we all know, depends upon the relative concentration of hydrogen ions, acidity, or OH ions which are present in it, the hydroxyl ions. Now, acidity is due to the presence of excess of hydrogen ions, whereas alkalinity is due to the excess of OH ions. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. Now, we know the values which are below 7, they are acidic, and which are above 7 are alkaline. pH value of 7 is considered neutral, where H plus and OH ions, they both are equal. They both are at the concentration of 10 to the power of minus 7 moles per liter. Indication of acidity or alkalinity of the soil is also known as soil reaction. Now, pH of the soil affects the solubility of iron, which in turn affects microbial and plant growth. A pH range of 6 to 6.8 is ideal for most crops because it provides optimum solubility of the most important plant nutrients. In acidic soils, like hydrogen and aluminium are the dominant exchangeable cations, and the factors that affect soil pH include parent material, vegetation and climate of that particular area. Now, moving on to the types of soils. The soils have been differentiated into various types depending upon the basis of their origin and relationship with the parent rock. Now, there are two types of soils based on this, which are residual soils and transported soils. Now, if we talk of residual soils, these are the soils that are formed at the same site where the weathering of the parent material takes place, that is, formed under in situ conditions from underlying rocks. In India, these soils are further of two types. One are the reddish soils, which are poor in calcium, magnesium, phosphorus and nitrogen, but rich in iron oxides, iron and its oxides. And the other one is black soil. Now, black soil is the one which is rich in clay and possesses high quantities of potash, calcium, magnesium and iron. Now, moving on to the next type of soils, that is the transported soils. These soils, as the name suggests, are formed from the weathered material which is transported and deposited away from the site of origin. These soils are of different types depending upon the type of agent which is involved in its transportation. Now, first type is colloidal soils. These soils are formed from material which are transported by pull of gravity or under conditions of landslide. It is very coarse and consists of large fragments of rocks. Then another one is alluvial soil. The soil is formed under conditions of running water such as floodplains, river terraces and deltas. The soil particles are rounded and smooth. Unlike in colluvial, the particle size varies depending upon the speed of the transporting water. Third type is the glacial soil. These soils are formed by the grinding action of ice and snow. Heavy snow masses and glaciers push the surface material. Sharp edged rocks get grounded into smooth particles by the abrasive action. Then next type of soil is the aeolian soil. These soils are formed by transportation through the wind, and these include dunes, loess, etc. They occur along the side of water bodies. The water currents, they erode the land, and this leads to deposition of the soil particles, which is known as aeolian soil. Now, moving on to the other component of soil, which is very important and you must find very interesting, which is soil biota and fertility. Now, we all know that there are living organisms which are present in soil. They are known as soil biota, and they play very important role in the formation of soil as well as its development. Now, soil organisms, they alter the soil's physical, chemical and biological properties in different ways. The biotic communities influence the spatial heterogeneity of the resource. Now, biological functions of soil biota, they help in improving soil health function, quality, fertility and provide a sustainable alternate for the soil management. Soil formation and improvement of soil structure is the major function which is performed by the soil biota. Now, bacteria, we all know, are present abundantly in soil, and they secrete some mucilaginous and organic substances which cover cells and their colonies. These substances, they help in cementing the soil grains to form larger aggregates. The fungi which is present in the soil also helps in binding the soil particles together. Now, decay and nutrient cycling is another major function which is performed by organisms which are present in the soil. These organisms, they act as the chief agents of decay of organic matter. So, the decomposition and mineralization helps in the release of inorganic nutrients that are absorbed by the plant roots. So, these organisms which are present in the soil include bacteria, various types of fungi, actinomycetes, etc. Now, these organisms bring out hydrolysis and oxidation of organic compounds through various enzymatic reactions. Soil fauna such as millipedes, centipedes, earthworms, mites, ants, beetles, snails, they consume plant products, that is litter. They consume plant litter and leave the decomposed product in the soil. So, the complex organic compounds are broken down into simpler compounds with the help of soil fauna. Nitrogen fixation is another important function which is performed by microbes that are present in the soil. Now, microorganisms such as Azotobacter, Clostridium, Rhizobium, they help in fixation of atmospheric nitrogen by converting the atmospheric nitrogen to organic nitrogen, which is readily available for the plants, and it helps in its growth and carrying out the metabolic processes. Now, the fixed nitrogen is utilized by other organisms. The amount of nitrogen fixation has a direct impact or effect on the soil fertility. Heterotrophic soil organisms, including bacteria and fungi, they produce growth promoting substances such as triindole acetic acid, which we call it IAA. These substances support the growth of plants. So, now after the soil, after the details of various factors of the adaphic factor soil, I will be now moving on to other abiotic factors. We already discussed abiotic factor, but light, temperature, wind, water, air, soil play an important role in sustaining living organisms in an ecosystem. So, now let us discuss the other components, light and temperature, in this lecture. These two factors play an important role in establishment, survival and development of biotic communities. The amount of light energy reaching the earth regulates the surface temperature, thus influencing the growth, development and distribution of various biotic communities. We all know all living organisms, they get adapted to a particular temperature in which they survive and reproduce. They also tolerate fluctuations in temperature by developing certain specialized structures and physiological features called as adaptations. Sun is the ultimate source of energy for living beings which are present in the biosphere. Now, we will start with ecological factor light. The electromagnetic radiations from the sun supply energy and warm up the earth. Light regulates the various essential activities in living organisms, which includes plants and animals. Now, the radiation which is coming from sun provides a favorable global temperature for the survival of living organisms on this earth. Light plays an important role in essential processes such as photosynthesis in plants. It is the process by which plants convert the light energy from the sun into usable chemical energy. The variations in availability of light affects the distribution of biotic communities to quite an extent. Now, let us discuss the electromagnetic spectrum before we could understand light and its importance to plants in detail. So, what is electromagnetic spectrum? The radiation which is emitted from the sun, it travels through space and reaches earth. The electromagnetic spectrum of sun consists of rays of wavelengths which range from gamma rays, X-rays, UV rays, visible, infrared and radio waves. Now, ultraviolet rays, gamma and X-rays have the shortest wavelengths, while the microwaves and the radio waves have longer wavelengths. Electromagnetic radiation has dual nature, that is both particle and wave. Now, solar radiation is a form of energy. It is present in the form of packets of energy called photons. The photons of each wavelength have different quanta of energy. The amount of energy depends upon the wavelength or frequency. It is expressed as, you can see, E is equal to h mu, where E is the energy of the wave, which is expressed in joules per second, and h is the Planck's proportionality constant. It has the value of 1.6 into 10 to the power of minus 34 calories per second. Mu is the frequency of wave, which is expressed in Hertz cycle per second. Now, how do we calculate mu? We know that frequency is c by lambda, where c is the velocity of light, which is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meters per second, and lambda is the wavelength, which is expressed in centimeter per meter. So, the part of light which is seen by our eyes is the visible spectrum, and the visible light covers the wavelength within the range of 0.4 to 0.7 micrometer. Now, we perceive colors from the visible portion of the spectrum. Blue, green, red, they are the primary colors of the visible spectrum, and each color of visible spectrum has a particular wavelength. The longest wavelength in visible spectrum is red and the shortest is violet. Now, this slide shows the basically wavelength in nanometers, and you can see the spectrum over here, where you can see the violet with the shortest and the red with the wavelength. Now, moving on to the radiations ranging from 300 to 900 nanometers affect the photobiological processes in living organisms. Now, infrared region or IR region of the spectrum covers the wavelength ranging from approximately 0.7 micrometers to 100 micrometers. The infrared regions can be divided into two categories based on their properties: the reflected IR infrared and the emitted or the thermal infrared. So, there are two types of infrared wavelengths regions. The reflected IR region is used for remote sensing. It is similar to radiation in the visible portion. The reflected IR covers wavelengths within the range of 0.7 micrometer to 3 micrometers. Now, the second one is the thermal IR region. It represents the part of radiation emitted from Earth's surface in the form of heat. The thermal IR covers wavelength in the range of 3 micrometers to 100 micrometers. Now, let's move on to and let's discuss solar energy input. The incoming solar radiation is known as insolation. It is received in the form of short waves which are of electromagnetic nature. These short wave or ultraviolet rays are absorbed partly by the atmosphere, and on reaching the Earth's surface, they get reflected back and get converted into long wave radiation. Earth's surface receives this radiant energy at the rate of 2 calories per square centimeter per minute. So, the solar radiation or the energy reaches the Earth's surface, and approximately 5.6 into the 10 to the power of 27 calories per minute of energy is radiated by sun, of which around half of 1 billionth is intercepted by the Earth. The amount of incoming solar radiation absorbed by the atmosphere has a constant value and is referred as solar constant. Now, it is the rate at which the solar radiation falls on the surface of Earth when Earth is at a mean distance from the sun. The rays are perpendicular to the solar beam. The radiation has been categorized as short wave or long wave. Visible light and the ultraviolet radiation are commonly called short wave radiations, while infrared radiation is referred to as long wave radiation. The short wave radiation is the radiation which comes from the sun and strikes the Earth's surface. The sun radiates energy mainly in the form of visible light with small amounts of UV, that is ultraviolet, and infrared radiations. Hence, solar radiation is considered short wave radiation. Some of the short wave radiation that reaches the Earth's surface gets reflected back. This is referred to as albedo. Now, it differs from different surfaces. Now, albedo is the reflected radiation per incident radiation into 100. Now, a surface covered by ice or snow have high albedo. High albedo means around 80 to 90% of the incoming radiation gets reflected back. In contrast, a forest has a low albedo because around 5% of the radiation gets reflected back. The global average albedo is around 30%, 0.30 or 30% reflectance. Now, some of the energy absorbed by the Earth's surface is emitted back into space as long wave radiation, and the amount of energy emitted depends upon the temperature of the surface. Hotter the surface, more is the energy emitted. Now, long wave radiations emitted by the Earth's surface, they are absorbed by water vapor and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the absorbed radiation keeps the surface temperature warm, as the gases present in the atmosphere, they do not allow radiation to reflect back. This process is called greenhouse effect. Now, the difference between the incoming short wave, that is the solar radiation, and the outgoing long wave, that is terrestrial radiation, is called as net radiation, which determines the surface temperature. Now, if the amount of incoming short wave radiation is more than the amount of outgoing long wave radiation, surface temperature increases. Inversely, if the surface temperature decreases, the amount of long wave radiation is more than the incoming short wave radiation. So, the amount of incoming short wave radiation intercepted by the Earth and the amount of long wave radiation emitted by the Earth's surface balances, and the average surface temperature of Earth remains approximately 15 degrees Celsius. The amount of radiation absorbed is continuously re-radiated from Earth as heat in the form of infrared radiation and is released in space. The amount of radiation which is transmitted back regulates the surface temperature of the Earth. The special distribution of radiation gets altered in the region of clouds, water and vegetation. The ultraviolet radiation gets absorbed by ozone layer present in the atmosphere, while visible light gets absorbed in the atmosphere. The solar radiation traveling through the atmosphere gets scattered, dispersed or absorbed. In terms of percentage, about 30% of the radiation gets reflected by clouds, scattered and lost in space, and around 19% is absorbed by the gases such as oxygen, ozone and water or ice crystals and as suspended particles. The remaining 51% reaching the Earth's surface is either absorbed or reflected by the Earth's surface. The absorbed radiation gets converted into heat energy and causes warming. Thus, in total, 70% of radiation is involved in the functioning of the biosphere. Now, this slide shows the same thing which I discussed, the incoming solar energy, which is 100%, 10%, 70% is absorbed and rest is basically given out in the atmosphere. And this is the basically energy which is the thermal energy which is absorbed or reflected back from the Earth's surface. Now, let's move on to the factors that affect the basically light and distribution of insolation. The amount of radiation absorbed or reflected depends upon several factors, including angle of incidence of radiation, topography of the region and color of the land surfaces. So, in the next part I will be discussing the distribution of insolation in detail. Thank you.